Mira Chen sat in the back corner of Classroom 7 on the 32nd floor of the Galactic Military Academy. She had chosen this seat on purpose 3 years ago when she first arrived, and she had never moved from it. The seat was perfect because it was far from the instructor's desk, hidden behind a support pillar, and close enough to the window that she could watch the ships come and go from the orbital station without anyone noticing. She was 19 years old, small for her age, with dark hair that she kept tied back in a simple knot. Her uniform was always clean but never pressed perfectly like the other cadets. Her boots were regulation but worn at the heels from years of use. Everything about her screamed average, forgettable, unremarkable. And that was exactly how she wanted it. The instructor, Commander Voss, was explaining something about tactical formations during atmospheric entry. Mira already knew everything he was saying. She had read all the textbooks twice in her first year. But she never raised her hand. She never answered questions. She completed her assignments with scores just high enough to pass but never high enough to stand out. Around her, the other cadets talked and laughed and competed with each other for attention. There was Marcus Webb, the tall golden-haired son of Admiral Webb, who everyone knew would graduate at the top of the class because of his family connections. There was Priya Sharma, brilliant and beautiful, who led the combat simulation teams and had already been recruited by 3 different fleet commanders. There was Gene Takeda, whose reflexes were so fast that people whispered he had illegal neural enhancements. These were the stars of the academy. These were the names that professors remembered and admirals visited. These were the cadets whose pictures appeared on recruitment posters and whose accomplishments were broadcast across the 12 colony worlds. Mira was none of these things. Most of her instructors had to check their tablets to remember her name. Her classmates walked past her in the hallways without seeing her. She ate alone in the cafeteria, studied alone in the library, trained alone in the simulation rooms during the early morning hours when no one else was awake. She preferred it this way. What no one knew, what no one could possibly have guessed, was that Mira Chen was hiding. She had been hiding for 3 years, ever since she arrived at the academy with forged documents and a fabricated background story. Her real name was not Mira Chen. Her real history was something she had buried so deep that sometimes even she forgot it was there. But today, something was going to change. Today, the comfortable invisibility she had built around herself was going to shatter into a million pieces. The first sign came during the afternoon meal period. Mira was sitting at her usual table in the corner of the cafeteria, eating a bowl of protein soup and reading a technical manual on her tablet, when the main screens throughout the room suddenly flickered. Every conversation stopped. Every head turned toward the displays. The face that appeared was not human. It was Cathari, one of the insectoid species that had been at war with the Human Federation for the past 8 years. The Cathari had 6 eyes arranged in a circle around their heads, mandibles that clicked when they spoke, and exoskeletons that ranged from deep purple to black. This particular Cathari wore the ceremonial armor of a high commander, which meant he was one of the 12 most powerful military leaders in their entire civilization. Humans of the Federation, the translator rendered his clicking speech into cold, mechanical words. We come with a proposal. Your government refuses to end this war through negotiation. They believe they can defeat us through force. They are wrong. But we are tired of endless battles. We offer a solution. The cafeteria was completely silent. Mira had stopped eating. Her spoon hung motionless halfway to her mouth. The ancient protocols of challenge combat, the Cathari continued. 1 warrior from each side. The winner takes all. If your champion defeats ours, we will withdraw from all contested systems and sign a permanent peace treaty. If our champion defeats yours, you will surrender your outer colonies and pay tribute for the next 100 years. The implications were staggering. 8 years of war, millions of deaths, entire planets destroyed, and it could all end with a single fight. You have 7 days to select your champion, the High Commander said. We will meet at the neutral station of Carvax Prime. We look forward to seeing what humanity considers its finest warrior. The screen went dark. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then, the cafeteria exploded into noise. Everyone was talking at once, arguing, speculating, shouting names of famous soldiers and legendary commanders who might be chosen for this impossible task. Mira quietly finished her soup. Her hand was steady, but, inside, her heart was pounding. She knew things about the Cathari that nobody else in this room could possibly know. She knew about the ancient protocols. She knew about the kinds of warriors they produced for such challenges. And she knew that whoever the Federation sent would almost certainly die. The next few days were chaos. The Academy suspended normal classes as news feeds from across the 12 colonies dominated every screen and conversation. Debates raged about who should be chosen. Some said Admiral Webb himself should fight. Others argued for General Santos, the hero of the Battle of Proxima. Still others pushed for younger warriors, soldiers who had spent their entire careers fighting the Cathari and knew their tactics intimately. But there was a problem that quickly became apparent. The ancient protocols had specific rules. The champion had to be between 18 and 25 years old. They had to be unmarried, without children. They had to have completed at least 2 years of official military training but could not hold a rank higher than lieutenant. These restrictions eliminated almost everyone being discussed. On the third day, the Federation announced it would hold a tournament at the Academy to select its champion. All eligible cadets from every military institution would compete. The winner would fight for humanity. Mira watched the announcement from her dormitory room, sitting on her narrow bed with her back against the wall. She knew she should stay hidden. She knew she should let someone else step forward, let some other warrior take this burden. But she also knew what would happen if she did. She had seen Cathari Challenge champions fight. She had watched recordings that no human was supposed to have access to. The Federation was about to send one of their young cadets to be slaughtered, and there was nothing anyone could do about it because no one knew what they were really facing. Except her. She spent that night lying awake, staring at the ceiling, arguing with herself. One voice said to stay quiet, stay invisible, finish her time at the Academy and disappear into some remote colony where no one would ever find her. Another voice said she had run far enough and hidden long enough, and sometimes there were things more important than survival. When morning came, she had made her decision. The qualification tournament began on the 5th day after the announcement. 3,000 cadets from 12 different academies had been gathered at the main training facility. The gymnasium had been converted into a massive combat arena, with observation platforms rising in tiers all around it. Military officials, government representatives, and news crews filled every available space. Mira stood in the back of the assembly area where cadets waited to compete. She was wearing her standard training uniform, carrying no weapons, displaying no marks of achievement or distinction. Several cadets bumped into her without apologizing, not even registering that she was there. She was so unremarkable that people's eyes seemed to slide right past her. The tournament format was simple. Combat simulations using training weapons. Each cadet would face a randomly selected opponent. Winners advanced. Losers went home. By the end of the day, 3,000 would become 300. By the end of the week, 300 would become 1. Myra's first opponent was a tall, muscular cadet from the Mars Academy named Tomas Reyes. He looked at her with confusion when her name was called, then shrugged and stepped into the arena as if this was going to be the easiest fight of his life. It lasted 4 seconds. Mira moved in a way that shouldn't have been possible. She didn't seem to be moving fast, but somehow she was inside his guard before he could react. Her training blade touched his throat, his wrist, his knee, 3 killing strikes in the time it took most people to blink. The referee's whistle blew. The match was over. Tomas Reyes stood frozen, trying to understand what had just happened. Mira bowed politely and walked out of the arena. Nobody noticed. The crowds were watching Marcus Webb defeat an opponent from the Luna Academy with impressive technique and power. The commentators were talking about Priya Sharma's perfect record and Jean Takeda's supernatural reflexes. A quiet girl winning a single match in the early rounds wasn't worth anyone's attention. Her second match lasted 6 seconds. Her third, 5. Her fourth opponent was larger and more experienced, and she took the full 12 seconds to defeat him because she didn't want to reveal too much. By the end of the first day, she had won 7 matches. Her total combined combat time was under a minute. But she had deliberately chosen moments when the crowds were distracted and the cameras were pointed elsewhere. Her name appeared on the advancement lists, but it meant nothing to anyone. Mira Chen. Who was that? Never heard of her. The second day continued the same way. The third. The fourth. With each round, the competition became more serious. The remaining cadets were the best of the best from across human space. Every match was being analyzed by military strategists and broadcast to billions of viewers. And, still, nobody noticed Mira. She fought in the shadow of bigger events. When she won, there was always something more interesting happening in another arena. When she advanced, the commentators were always talking about someone else. It was as if she existed in a blind spot in everyone's perception, slipping through the tournament like a ghost. But Commander Voss noticed. He was the instructor from her tactical formations class, the one who had to check his tablet to remember her name. But he was also a former special operations officer with 30 years of experience, and something about this quiet girl's fighting style had caught his attention. He went back and watched her matches. All of them. And what he saw made his blood run cold. On the evening of the fourth day, there were only 16 cadets remaining. Tomorrow, they would fight until only one was left. The entire Federation was watching. Marcus Webb was the favorite, with betting odds heavily in his favor. Priya Sharma was the second choice. Jean Takeda was third. Mira Chen wasn't even on the betting boards. Nobody knew who she was. That night, there was a knock on her dormitory door. She opened it to find Commander Voss standing in the hallway, his face pale and his hands trembling slightly. "May I come in?" he asked. She stepped aside to let him enter. Her room was small and bare, with no decorations or personal items, nothing that revealed anything about who she was. Voss stood in the center of the room, looking at her as if seeing her for the first time. "I watched your fights," he said. "All of them. The way you move, the techniques you use, the precision of your strikes. I've only seen fighting like that once before, during the war." It was a Kethari recording, captured from one of their military databases. A recording of their supreme warriors, the ones they call the Unmarked. Mira said nothing. Her face remained completely still. "The Unmarked are trained from birth," Voss continued. "Taken from their families as infants and raised in isolation. They have no names, no identities, no connections to anyone or anything. They exist only to fight, only to kill. The Kethari use them for missions so dangerous that regular soldiers would refuse them. And for challenge combat." He paused, studying her face for any reaction. There was none. "The fighting style I saw in that recording was ancient. It was developed over thousands of years, perfected through countless generations. It's completely different from anything humans use. No human could possibly know it, could possibly reproduce it, unless..." He trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Mira finally spoke. Her voice was quiet, calm, revealing nothing. "Unless what, Commander?" "Unless they were trained by the Kethari themselves." The silence stretched between them. Outside, somewhere in the academy, cadets were celebrating or commiserating, preparing for tomorrow's finals, dreaming of glory. In this small room, two people stood facing each other across a gap that might have been an entire galaxy. "Who are you?" Voss whispered. "Who are you really?" Mira walked to her window and looked out at the stars. She was quiet for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was different. Harder. Older. The voice of someone who had seen and done things that most people couldn't imagine. "My name isn't Mira Chen," she said. "I don't have a name. I never did. Among the Kethari, I was called 17, because I was the 17th infant taken that year for the Unmarked program. I was raised in their training facilities. I learned their fighting arts. I was shaped into a weapon. She turned to face him. Her eyes, which had always seemed so ordinary, now held something ancient and terrible. 15 years ago, a human colony ship was captured by Cathari raiders. There was a baby among the prisoners. That baby was me. The Cathari don't waste useful resources. When they realized humans could be trained the same way their own children were trained, they decided to experiment. I was their experiment. Voss felt like the floor had dropped away beneath him. How did you escape? I didn't escape, she said. I was released. 2 years ago, my masters completed my training and sent me on my first real mission. I was supposed to infiltrate human space, gather intelligence, and eventually assassinate key military and political targets. I was supposed to be the perfect weapon, a human who fought like a Cathari, who could move among humans without suspicion while serving Cathari interests. But you didn't. No. I didn't. She looked down at her hands, the hands that had been trained to kill since before she could walk. When I arrived in human space, something happened that my masters hadn't anticipated. I started to remember. Not specific memories, but feelings. The warmth of being held. The sound of a human voice singing. The smell of something cooking. Things from before I was taken. Things that the Cathari training was supposed to have erased completely. She clenched her fists. I realized that I wasn't a weapon. I was a person. A person who had been stolen and broken and rebuilt into something monstrous. And I decided that I would rather die as a human than live as a Cathari tool. So you came to the academy. I came to the academy to hide. To learn how to be human. To be invisible, unremarkable, forgettable. I thought if I could just stay quiet and, unnoticed, I could eventually disappear into some remote colony and live out whatever life I had left in peace. Voss shook his head slowly. But, now the challenge has been issued. The Cathari are sending an unmarked warrior to fight for them. And, you're the only one who knows what that means. They're sending 12, Mira said. The one they call the Storm's Edge. He was the best of my generation. The one who completed his training before any of us. The one who never failed a single mission. If he fights any of the cadets here, even the best of them, he will kill them in seconds. Marcus Webb, Priya Sharma, Jean Takeda, they're all talented, but they have no idea what they're facing. None of them will survive. But you could. She was silent for a moment. Maybe. 12 and I trained together for years. I know his techniques, his patterns, his weaknesses. If anyone has a chance against him, it's me. But, if I fight, my identity will be revealed. Everyone will know what I am. A Cathari weapon. A traitor to both species. There will be no hiding after that, no disappearing, no peaceful life on some remote colony. Voss stepped closer to her. 3,000 cadets entered this tournament. 16 remain. Tomorrow, one will be chosen to fight for all of humanity. If that person isn't you, they will die. And, after they die, the Federation will lose the challenge, and billions of people in the outer colonies will spend the next 100 years under Cathari domination. He put his hand on her shoulder. It was the first time anyone had touched her with kindness in longer than she could remember. I know I'm asking you to give up everything, he said. The invisibility you've worked so hard to build. The hope of a normal life. Maybe even your life itself. But, you have skills that no one else has. Knowledge that no one else has. You might be the only person in all of human space who can win this fight. Mira looked at his hand on her shoulder, then, up at his face. She saw something there that surprised her. Not suspicion or fear, though those would have been reasonable. She saw respect. She saw hope. She saw a man who was looking at a monster and choosing to see a person instead. If I do this, she said slowly, people will know what I am. They'll hate me. They'll fear me. They might even try to kill me after the fight is over, regardless of whether I win or lose.
Maybe, Voss admitted. Or maybe they'll see what I see.
A young woman who was stolen from her people and turned into a weapon, but who chose humanity anyway. Who chose to fight for the species that should have been hers from the beginning.
That's not a monster, Mira.
That's a hero.
She almost smiled. Almost. Nobody has ever called me a hero before. Then, it's about time someone did.
She turned back to the window and looked out at the stars again. Somewhere out there, across the vast darkness of space, the Cathari were preparing their champion. Storm's Edge was probably training right now, honing his already deadly skills, preparing to face whatever pathetic human the Federation sent against him.
He didn't know that she was here.
He didn't know that the weapon the Cathari had created and lost was about to return. Tomorrow, she said quietly.
Tomorrow I'll stop hiding. Tomorrow everyone will know. Voss nodded and moved toward the door.
He paused before leaving.
Mira.
Whatever your name was before, whatever they called you in those training facilities, you're Mira-chen now.
A cadet at this academy. A human being.
And, tomorrow, you're going to show the entire galaxy what that means. He left, closing the door softly behind him. Mira stood alone in her small room, looking at the stars, feeling the weight of everything she had tried to leave behind settling back onto her shoulders. She had spent 3 years building an invisible life, and tomorrow she was going to burn it all down.
But, maybe, she thought, maybe some things were worth burning for.
She lay down on her bed and closed her eyes. For the first time in years, she dreamed of warmth, of being held, of a human voice singing her to sleep. And, somewhere in that dream, she found something she had thought was lost forever.
She found her name.
The morning of the final tournament day arrived with a sky full of gray clouds and a tension that seemed to press down on everything. The academy grounds were packed with people who had traveled from across the 12 colonies to witness history.
News drones filled the air like swarms of mechanical insects.
Security officers stood at every entrance, every corridor, every possible point of access. This was the most important day in human military history since the war began. In her small dormitory room, Mira-chan was already awake. She had been awake for hours, sitting cross-legged on her bed, breathing slowly, preparing her mind and body the way she had been trained to do since she was old enough to stand. The Cathari meditation techniques were designed to empty the mind of everything except the present moment, to transform the warrior into pure focused intention. She had used these techniques countless times before, but always in secret, always in the early hours when no one else was watching. Today, she would not be able to hide what she knew. Today, everyone would see. She dressed in her standard training uniform and walked to the main arena. The corridors were crowded with cadets and visitors, but they parted around her without really seeing her, their eyes sliding past as they always did. She was invisible right up until the moment she stepped into the fighters' assembly area and stood among the other 15 finalists. Marcus Webb was there, surrounded by a crowd of admirers and journalists. He was laughing and confident, posing for pictures, giving interviews about how honored he was to potentially represent humanity. Priya Sharma stood apart from the others, her face calm and focused, stretching her muscles and visualizing the fights ahead. Gene Takeda was bouncing slightly on his feet, his nervous energy barely contained.
None of them looked at Mira.
None of them knew she existed. The tournament organizers called all 16 fighters to the center of the arena for the opening ceremony.
The Academy's commandant, Admiral Helena Cross, gave a speech about honor and duty and the weight of responsibility.
Government officials presented medals and flags and symbols of human achievement. Speeches were broadcast to billions of viewers across all 12 colonies and, beyond, to ships and stations and outposts scattered throughout human space. Through it all, Mira stood at the end of the line, her face blank, her posture unremarkable, just another nameless cadet who would probably be eliminated in the early rounds.
The fights began. The format for the final day was different from the qualification rounds.
Each match would be fought until one combatant was clearly defeated, with judges making the final call on victory. The weapons were still training blades, unable to cause serious injury, but the fighting would be real, intense, and absolutely without mercy.
Myra's first opponent of the day was a heavily muscled cadet from the Europa Academy named Dmitry Volkov.
He was a specialist in strength-based combat styles, famous for overwhelming opponents with raw power. When he saw Mira step into the arena across from him, he actually laughed.
The referee signaled the start of the match. Volkov charged forward like a bull, expecting to end the fight in one devastating strike. He never got close.
Mira moved like water, flowing around his attack, redirecting his momentum, using angles and leverage that seemed to defy physics. She struck him 17 times in 3 seconds, each blow landing on a nerve cluster or pressure point with surgical precision.
By the time Volkov realized he was losing, he couldn't feel his arms anymore.
His legs buckled.
He crashed to the ground, unable to move, unable to understand what had happened. The arena went silent.
This was not like her quiet victories in the qualification rounds. This fight had been in the center of the main arena, under full lighting, with every camera pointed directly at it. Every person in the stadium, every viewer across the 12 colonies, had just witnessed something impossible.
The commentators were speechless for a long moment, then erupted into confused babbling.
Nobody recognized the fighting style Mira had used. Nobody could explain how a small, unknown girl had dismantled a trained combat specialist in seconds. The replay systems struggled to track her movements because she had been too fast for standard recording speeds.
Her second opponent approached the arena with considerably more caution.
Her name was Elena Rodriguez, and she was one of the top 3 favorites to win the tournament. She had studied martial arts from 6 different human traditions and had won championships across the solar system. She looked at Mira with the first hints of real concern in her eyes.
This fight lasted longer. 8 seconds instead of 3.
But the result was the same. Elena attacked with everything she had, every technique she knew, every dirty trick she had ever learned.
Mira countered all of it. She moved through Elena's defenses like they weren't there, like she could see exactly what Elena was going to do before Elena herself knew. When Elena finally fell, there was fear on her face. Real fear. The crowd was no longer silent.
They were shouting, pointing, demanding to know who this girl was. The commentators were pulling up her records and finding almost nothing.
Mira Chen. Average grades. No combat awards. No special achievements.
A complete nobody who had somehow just defeated 2 of the tournament's top fighters without breaking a sweat. In the observation area reserved for academy instructors, Commander Voss watched with a mixture of pride and worry.
He knew what was coming. He knew that with every victory, more people would start asking questions. And, eventually, someone would find the answers.
The quarter-final matches began. There were 8 fighters left.
Mira drew Jean Takeda as her opponent. Takeda was famous for his speed. People said he had reflexes faster than any human being alive.
There were rumors that he had undergone illegal enhancement procedures that had pushed his nervous system beyond natural limits. When he fought, his movements were a blur that ordinary eyes couldn't follow. He stepped into the arena across from Mira with respect in his eyes. He had watched her previous fights. He knew she was dangerous. But he also knew that no one was faster than him. No one. The match began. What happened next became one of the most analyzed pieces of combat footage in human history. Later, military experts would slow the recording down to thousandths of a second and still struggle to understand what they were seeing. Both fighters moved at speeds that shouldn't have been possible for human bodies. They exchanged dozens of strikes in the first second alone. Their weapons met and separated so quickly that the sound of the impacts blurred into a continuous roar. But, slowly, inevitably, Mira began to gain ground. For every 10 attacks Takeda launched, she blocked 9 and countered with 11. Her movements were not just fast, they were efficient. She never wasted motion, never overextended, never gave him an opening. It was as if she was reading his mind, knowing what he would do before he did it. The fight lasted 34 seconds. An eternity compared to her previous matches. When it ended, Takeda was on his knees, his training blade on the ground beside him, his enhanced reflexes completely overwhelmed.
He looked up at her with something like wonder. "What are you?" he whispered. Mira didn't answer. She bowed politely and walked out of the arena. The semifinals were next.
Only 4 fighters remained.
Marcus Webb, Priya Sharma, a cadet named Thomas Gray, and Mira Chen. The crowds were in an uproar. The betting odds had completely collapsed. Every news channel across human space was now focused on the mystery girl who had appeared from nowhere and was destroying the competition. Admiral Cross called an emergency meeting of the tournament officials. Security teams were dispatched to check Myra's records more thoroughly. Intelligence officers began running her biometric data through classified databases. Somewhere in the bowels of the academy, computers were searching for any information that might explain how a supposedly average cadet had developed skills that surpassed everything humanity had ever produced. But Mira knew they wouldn't find anything. Her cover identity had been created by the Cathari themselves, who had spent decades studying human systems and knew exactly how to create documents that would pass any inspection. The real answers were buried in databases that no human could access. The semi-final matches began.
Mira faced Thomas Gray, a solid fighter with good fundamentals but nothing special.
She defeated him in 4 seconds, not even bothering to hide her abilities anymore.
There was no point in hiding now. The entire galaxy was watching.
In the other semi-final, Marcus Webb fought Priya Sharma in a match that would normally have been the highlight of the entire tournament. They were both skilled, both trained, both desperate to represent humanity in the challenge combat. But, watching them fight, Mira could see all the flaws in their technique, all the gaps in their training, all the ways they would be exploited and destroyed by a true Cathari warrior. Webb won, barely, after a hard-fought battle that left both fighters exhausted. The crowd cheered wildly. This was what they had come to see. 2 great warriors pushing each other to the limit. And now it came down to 2. Marcus Webb, the golden boy, the admiral's son, the favorite to win. And Mira Chen, the mystery, the nobody, the ghost who had somehow fought her way to the final match. The officials called for a 30-minute break before the championship. Webb used the time to recover, to receive medical attention for his minor injuries, to consult with trainers and coaches about strategy. Mira sat alone in a corner of the preparation area, eyes closed, breathing slowly, her mind empty and clear. A hand touched her shoulder. She opened her eyes to find Commander Voss standing there. "They're going to demand answers after this," he said quietly. "No matter who wins. They'll want to know everything." "I know. Are you ready for that?" She considered the question for a long moment. "No. But I'm going to do it anyway." He nodded and stepped back. "Whatever happens in there, I want you to know something. What you're doing, what you're sacrificing, it matters. It matters more than you can know." The call came for the final match. Mira stood and walked toward the arena. The roar of the crowd was deafening. Every person in the stadium was on their feet. Every camera in the building was pointed at the 2 fighters who would determine humanity's champion. Marcus Webb stood at one end of the arena, tall and golden, every inch the perfect image of a human warrior. His father, Admiral Webb, watched from the VIP section with undisguised pride. Government officials and military commanders sat in rows around him, all certain that they were about to witness the coronation of humanity's greatest hope. Mira stood at the other end. Small, plain, unremarkable in every way that mattered to most people. But those who had studied her fights, who had really looked at what she could do, they were not looking at Webb anymore. They were looking at her. The referee raised his hand. The arena fell silent. 1 billion people held their breath. The hand came down. Webb attacked immediately, launching himself forward with a powerful combination that would have overwhelmed almost any opponent. He was faster than he had been in his semi-final match, stronger, more focused. He knew that he was fighting for his family's honor, for his own legacy, for the future of humanity itself. It wasn't enough. Mira didn't retreat, didn't dodge, didn't try to create distance.
She stepped directly into his attack, so close that their bodies almost touched, and began to dismantle him with clinical efficiency. Every strike he threw met empty air or was redirected into useless directions. Every opening he tried to create was closed before he could exploit it. Every technique he knew, every trick he had learned in years of training, proved completely ineffective. She hit him 37 times in the first 10 seconds. Not hard enough to cause serious injury, but hard enough to hurt, hard enough to make him stumble, hard enough to prove beyond any doubt that she was simply better than him in every possible way. Webb was stubborn. He was proud. He refused to fall. He kept fighting, kept attacking, kept trying to find some way through her impossible defense. His face was twisted with frustration and disbelief. He was Marcus Webb. He was the best. He was supposed to win. But she wasn't trying to beat him quickly. She was sending a message. She let the fight continue for 2 full minutes, far longer than it needed to last. She let the cameras capture every detail, let the analysts see every technique, let the entire human race understand exactly what they were dealing with. She showed them the speed, the precision, the ancient, alien fighting art that had been developed over thousands of years by a species that had been waging war since before humans had discovered fire. And then, when she had shown them enough, she ended it. Her final strike was so fast that the cameras barely caught it. One moment Webb was standing, trying to raise his weapon for another attack. The next moment he was on the ground, his training blade clattering away across the arena floor, his body completely unable to move. The arena was dead silent. Mira stood over her fallen opponent, breathing steadily, not even sweating. She had just defeated the best human fighters from 12 colonies, had just won the right to represent humanity in the challenge combat, and she looked like she hadn't even begun to try. The referee raised her hand. Winner and champion, Mira Chen. The silence continued for another heartbeat. Then, the crowd exploded. Some were cheering, overwhelmed by what they had witnessed. Others were shouting questions, demanding to know who she was, how she had done what she had done. Others still were simply staring in shock, unable to process what their eyes had shown them. Mira lowered her hand and walked to the edge of the arena. Security officers moved to intercept her, but Commander Voss stepped between them. "She'll answer your questions," he said. "All of them. But not here. Not like this." Admiral Cross appeared beside him, her face unreadable. She looked at Mira for a long moment, studying her the way a scientist might study an unknown specimen. "You have a lot to explain, young lady." "I know," Mira said. "And I will. But first, I need to tell you what we're really facing. The champion the Cathari are sending, the warrior I'll be fighting at Carvax Prime. His name is 12, and he was trained the same way I was. He's one of the unmarked." Cross's eyes widened. She was a career military officer who had spent years studying the Cathari. She knew what the unmarked were. "You know about them," Mira continued. "You know what they can do. What you don't know is that I am one of them. Or I was. I was taken as an infant and trained in their facilities for 15 years. I was supposed to be their weapon, their spy, their assassin. But I chose differently. I chose humanity." She looked around at the crowd, at the cameras, at the billions of people watching across the 12 colonies. This was the moment she had been dreading for 3 years. The moment when her invisibility ended and everyone saw who she really was. "My real name is 17, she said. "I have no human name, no human family, no human memories from before I was taken. Everything I am was built by the Cathari to serve their purposes. But, here, at this academy, I found something they didn't teach me about. I found what it means to be human. Not just the techniques or the technology or the civilization. The warmth. The kindness. The hope. The belief that people can be more than what they were made to be." She paused, gathering herself. "I know you have no reason to trust me. I know some of you will never accept me, no matter what I do. But I'm asking for one chance. One chance to fight for the species I should have belonged to from the beginning.
One chance to prove that I'm more than a weapon. One chance to stop the Cathari from winning this challenge and subjugating billions of people.
The silence stretched. Cross exchanged looks with the other officials, with the government representatives, with Admiral Webb who was rushing to his son's side. Debates would rage for hours after this. Arguments would be made for and against. Calls would be made to arrest her, to study her, to execute her as an enemy agent. But none of that would happen quickly enough to matter. The challenge combat was in 2 days. There was no time to find another champion, no time to train anyone else, no time to do anything except make a decision.
Cross looked at Mira for a long moment. Then, she nodded slowly.
"You'll fight," she said. "God help us all, you'll fight.
And, afterward, we'll have a very long conversation about everything you haven't told us." Mira bowed her head.
"Thank you, Admiral." She was led away by security officers who didn't know whether to treat her as a prisoner or a champion. The crowd parted around her, staring, whispering, afraid and fascinated in equal measure.
For 3 years she had been invisible, forgettable, just another face in the background. Now every person in human space knew her name. No, she thought. They knew a name. Mira Chen. The quiet student. The mystery fighter.
But they would learn her other name soon enough.
The name she would earn in the arena at Carvax Prime.
The name that would be spoken across the 12 colonies for generations to come.
The battle name of the girl who saved humanity.
She just had to survive long enough to earn it. The transport ship that would carry her to Carvax Prime was waiting in the orbital station's main hangar. It was a military vessel, sleek and fast, surrounded by armed guards and bristling with weapons. She would travel with a full diplomatic team, a medical staff, and a contingent of soldiers who had been told to protect her but who looked at her with barely concealed fear. Commander Voss was there to see her off. He stood apart from the others, his face weathered but kind, the only person in the hangar who didn't seem afraid of her.
"I brought you something," he said, handing her a small package. "It's not much, but I thought you might want it."
She opened the package carefully. Inside was a simple silver bracelet, the kind that human parents sometimes gave to their children on special occasions. It was plain and unadorned, but when she turned it over, she saw an inscription etched into the inside surface.
For Mira, it read, "Who chose to be human?"
She looked up at Voss, her eyes suddenly blurring with tears she didn't know she could still cry.
"I don't understand. Why would you give me this?"
"Because everyone needs to know they belong somewhere," he said.
"Even people who were raised by monsters.
Especially people who were raised by monsters.
You chose us, Mira. You chose humanity. This is our way of choosing you back."
She slipped the bracelet onto her wrist. It felt warm against her skin, warmer than any piece of metal should have been.
Or maybe that warmth was coming from somewhere else entirely.
"Thank you," she whispered.
"Thank you for seeing me. For really seeing me." He nodded and stepped back. "Now go. Go save us all.
And, when you come back, there will be a place for you here.
I promise." She boarded the transport without looking back.
The hatches sealed behind her.
The engines roared to life.
And, as the ship lifted away from the station and accelerated toward the jump point that would take her to Carvax Prime, Mira Chen, once called 17, once an unmarked weapon of the Cathari, touched the bracelet on her wrist and allowed herself to hope. She had spent her whole life being shaped into a weapon. Now she would find out if she could become something more. The journey to Carvax Prime would take 36 hours through hyperspace. 36 hours to prepare. 36 hours to remember everything she knew about 12, about his techniques, about his patterns, about the weaknesses that might exist in his seemingly perfect fighting style. 36 hours to decide if she was ready to kill the only other being in the universe who truly understood what she was. Because that was what this fight would come down to. Not points, not submissions, not judges' decisions. The ancient protocols of challenge combat demanded combat to the death.
one warrior would walk away. One warrior would not.
She had known this from the moment she decided to enter the tournament. She had known it when she fought her way through 3,000 cadets. She had known it when she revealed her true nature to the world. But, knowing it and facing it were two different things. In the darkness of hyperspace, surrounded by stars that stretched into infinite lines of light, Mira Chen closed her eyes and began to prepare for the hardest fight of her life. The fight that would determine the fate of billions. The fight that would finally prove whether she was truly human, or just a weapon pretending to be something more. Carvax Prime was a space station unlike anything in human space. It hung in the empty void between two galaxies, a neutral meeting point built centuries ago by a species that had gone extinct long before humans or Cathari had developed space travel. The station was massive, a sphere of dark metal nearly 100 kilometers in diameter, its surface covered with docking ports and observation platforms and structures whose purposes nobody could guess anymore. The combat arena was at the station's exact center, protected by shields that could contain any weapon known to either species. It was shaped like an ancient coliseum, with rising tiers of seats surrounding a circular fighting floor. The floor itself was made of a material that looked like polished black stone but was harder than diamond and could absorb any amount of impact without cracking. When Myra's transport docked at the station, representatives from both species were already waiting. The Cathari delegation stood on one side of the arrival hall, their purple and black exoskeletons gleaming under the artificial lights, their compound eyes watching the human ship with an intensity that felt almost physical. The human delegation stood on the other side, diplomats and military officers trying very hard to look confident despite the obvious tension in their bodies. Between them, standing alone in the center of the hall, was 12. Mira recognized him immediately. He was taller than she remembered, his exoskeleton darker, his movements even more controlled than they had been during their training years together. He wore the ceremonial armor of a Cathari challenge champion, intricate patterns carved into the chitin plates that covered his arms and torso. His mandibles clicked softly as he watched her descend the transport's ramp. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Around them, diplomats exchanged formal greetings and protocols were observed and documents were signed, but none of it mattered. The only thing that mattered was the two former unmarked warriors standing 30 meters apart, looking at each other across a gap that was much greater than physical distance. Then, 12 spoke, his voice rendered into human speech by the translator device around his neck.
17. I wondered if you would come. I wondered if you would be the one they sent. Who else would they send against a traitor? You were supposed to be our greatest weapon. Our perfect human agent. Instead you abandoned everything we built, everything we trained you to be. The masters were very disappointed. I'm sure they were. They want you back, you know. They don't want me to kill you. They want me to defeat you, break you, bring you back to the facilities to be reconditioned. They believe you can still be useful.
Mira felt her hands clench at her sides.
And, what do you want? 12's compound eyes glittered in the station's light. I want to prove that I am better than you. I always wanted that.
From the first day we trained together, from the first time you beat me in sparring, I wanted to prove that I was the superior warrior.
Now I finally have the chance. This isn't a training exercise, 12.
This is a fight to the death, with billions of lives in the balance.
I know. That makes it even better.
The formal ceremonies continued around them, but Mira had stopped paying attention. She was studying 12, analyzing his posture, the way he distributed his weight, the subtle tension in his limbs. He had changed since she last saw him. He was faster now, stronger, more confident. Whatever missions the masters had sent him on, they had hardened him into something even more dangerous than the warrior she remembered. But she had changed too. And there was something inside her now that hadn't been there before. Something warm and fierce and utterly human. The challenge combat was scheduled for the following morning, station time. Both fighters were given quarters on opposite sides of Carvax Prime, with strict protocols preventing any contact before the fight. Mira spent the night alone in a bare metal room, sitting cross-legged on the hard floor, her eyes closed and her mind turning inward. The Kethari meditation techniques were designed to empty the mind, to transform the warrior into pure focused intention.
But, tonight, Mira didn't want an empty mind.
Tonight, she filled her mind with memories. She remembered Commander Voss, the first person who had really looked at her and seen something other than what she appeared to be. She remembered the bracelet on her wrist and the inscription that declared her human. She remembered the cafeteria at the academy, the quiet corner where she had eaten alone for 3 years, watching the other cadets live their normal lives and wondering if she could ever have something like that.
She remembered the dreams. The warmth of being held. The sound of a human voice singing. The smell of something cooking.
Fragments of a life that had been stolen from her, memories that should have been erased but somehow survived. And she remembered why she was here. Not just to fight, not just to prove herself, but to protect the people who had shown her what humanity could be. Billions of people across the 12 colonies, people who would spend the next 100 years under Kethari domination if she failed tomorrow. When morning came, she was ready. The arena was filled beyond capacity. Representatives from a dozen species had come to witness the challenge combat, drawn by the historic nature of the event and the incredible story that had spread across the galaxy. A human raised by the Kethari, fighting against her own training, choosing to stand with the species she should have belonged to from birth. It was the kind of story that made even the most jaded beings pay attention. Mira entered through the eastern gate, dressed in simple human training clothes, carrying no weapons. The ancient protocol specified that fighters would use their bodies alone, no tools, no enhancements, no external assistance. It was a test of pure warrior skill, the most fundamental form of combat that existed. 12 entered through the western gate, his ceremonial armor removed, his dark exoskeleton gleaming under the arena lights. Without the armor, he looked leaner, more organic, more like the training partner Mira remembered from the facilities. They walked to the center of the arena and faced each other. The crowd fell silent.
Every camera in the station focused on them.
Across human space, billions of people watched from their homes, their workplaces, their ships and stations, all holding their breath. The Kethari High Commander who had issued the challenge rose from his seat in the observation area. His voice boomed through the arena's speakers. By the ancient protocols, by the agreements of our peoples, this challenge combat will determine the outcome of the war. The victor claims all. There are no rules except this. The fight ends only when one warrior falls and does not rise again. He paused, his compound eyes moving between the two fighters.
Begin. Neither of them moved.
For a long moment, they simply stood there, 3 meters apart, watching each other with the total focus of warriors who knew exactly how dangerous their opponent was. The crowd grew restless. The commentators who were broadcasting the fight started to question if something was wrong. Then, 12 spoke, his voice too quiet for the arena's microphones to pick up but loud enough for Mira to hear.
I dreamed about you, he said. After you left.
I dreamed about finding you, fighting you, proving once and for all who was better. The masters told me to forget, to focus on my missions, but I couldn't.
You were always there, in my mind, the one who got away. I'm not going to get away this time, Mira said. No. You're not.
He attacked. The crowd gasped. The commentators shouted. Every being in the arena surged forward in their seats, trying to see what was happening, but it was already moving too fast for most of them to follow.
12's first strike was a deceptively simple punch aimed at Mira's throat.
But behind that punch was 15 years of training, thousands of hours of practice, and the complete mastery of a fighting art developed over millennia. The punch was fast enough to kill before the target even knew they were in danger. Mira's hand came up and redirected the strike, turning 12's momentum against him, creating an opening for her own counter. Her elbow drove toward his temple with force that would have shattered human bone. He twisted away, accepting a glancing blow to avoid the full impact, and launched a spinning kick that would have separated her head from her shoulders. She ducked under it, swept his supporting leg, and struck upward toward his vulnerable thorax. He blocked, countered, attacked, defended. She matched him move for move, technique for technique, speed for speed. The fight that followed became legend.
Later, military analysts would spend years studying the recordings.
They would identify hundreds of distinct techniques, many of which had never been seen before by human observers. They would create training simulations based on the footage, would write academic papers about the biomechanics involved, would develop entirely new combat doctrines inspired by what they witnessed. But all of that came later.
In the moment, there was only the fight.
Mira and 12 danced across the arena, their movements a blur of strikes and blocks and throws and evasions.
The black stone floor cracked under the impact of their blows.
The air itself seemed to vibrate with the force of their combat. They moved through forms that had been perfected over thousands of years, techniques designed to exploit every weakness of the human and Cathari body, attacks that targeted nerves and joints and pressure points with surgical precision.
The first blood came after 2 minutes. 12's claw caught Myra's arm, opening a deep gash that immediately began to bleed.
She ignored the pain and drove her palm into his shoulder joint, dislocating something with an audible crack. He reset the joint with a twist of his body and kept attacking. She wrapped her bleeding arm and kept defending.
The minutes stretched into eternity. 5 minutes. 10. 15.
Both fighters were bleeding from multiple wounds, both were slowing as exhaustion began to take its toll, but neither would give ground. The crowd watched in stunned silence, unable to believe what they were witnessing. At the 20-minute mark, something changed. 12 launched a combination that Mira had seen before, a sequence they had practiced together in the training facilities countless times.
She knew exactly how to counter it.
But, this time, when she moved to execute the counter, she hesitated.
Not because of fear. Not because of doubt.
Because she suddenly realized something that changed everything.
She didn't want to kill him. 12 was a monster.
He had been trained by monsters to serve monstrous purposes. He had probably killed dozens of people, maybe hundreds, in service to the Cathari war machine.
He felt no remorse, no guilt, no connection to the beings he destroyed.
But he was also the only other creature in the universe who truly understood what she had been through. He was her training partner, her rival, the closest thing to a companion she had ever had during those long years in the facilities. In a strange way, he was her brother. And she couldn't kill her brother. The hesitation cost her. 12's strike connected with her ribs, cracking 2 of them, sending her sprawling across the arena floor. The crowd roared. The Cathari observers clicked their mandibles in what might have been satisfaction. 12 stood over her, his breath coming in ragged gasps, his body battered and bleeding from a dozen wounds. But his eyes were triumphant.
"I knew it," he said. "I knew you would hesitate.
The masters always said that your conditioning was incomplete, that something human remained beneath all the training. I told them they were wrong, but I was the one who was wrong.
You're weak, 17.
You always were." Mira lay on her back, looking up at him, feeling the pain from her broken ribs spread through her body with every breath. Around her, she could hear the human delegation crying out in dismay. She could feel the weight of billions of hopes pressing down on her, all those people who were counting on her to win, to save them, to prove that humanity could stand against the Cathari threat. And she could feel the bracelet on her wrist, warm against her skin, reminding her of who she was and why she was here.
"You're right," she said. "Something human did remain. But you're wrong about what that means." She moved.
It was not a technique from the Cathari fighting arts. It was not a move she had been trained to execute. It was something new, something born from the warmth and kindness and hope she had found in human space, something that combined everything she had learned with everything she had chosen to become.
She didn't attack his body. She attacked his mind.
Her hand shot up and grabbed his face, her fingers finding the pressure points around his compound eyes, and she poured everything she was feeling into that grip.
Not just physical force, but emotional force. The memories of warmth. The dreams of belonging.
The fierce determination to protect the people who had given her a chance.
12 froze. The Cathari were not supposed to be able to feel emotion the way humans did.
Their brains were structured differently, their consciousness operated on different principles. But the unmarked were different. The training that made them such perfect warriors also made them more mentally flexible, more open to unconventional influences. And Mira was not using a technique. She was sharing something real. "I know you feel it too," she whispered. "The emptiness. The longing. The sense that something is missing, that there should be more to existence than just fighting and killing and following orders. I felt it every day for 15 years, and I never knew what it was until I came to human space. It's connection, 12. It's belonging. It's the knowledge that you matter to someone, that someone cares whether you live or die." 12's body was trembling. His compound eyes were flickering with colors she had never seen before, patterns that might have been confusion or fear or something else entirely. "The masters lied to us," she continued. "They told us we were weapons, that weapons don't need connections, don't need meaning, don't need anything except a target and a purpose. But we're not weapons. We're people. We were stolen from our families, broken down, rebuilt into something we were never meant to be. And we can choose differently. We can choose to be more." "That's impossible," 12 said, but his voice was shaking. "I am what they made me. That's all I can ever be." "No. That's what I thought too. But I found something different. I found people who saw me as a person instead of a tool. I found a place where I belonged, even though I was different from everyone around me. I found the thing that was missing, the thing we were never supposed to have." She looked up at him, her eyes filled with something that might have been pity or might have been love or might have been both. "I found hope, 12. And I'm offering it to you." The arena was completely silent. Every being in the station was watching, waiting, trying to understand what was happening. The fight had stopped. The two warriors were frozen in place, one standing over the other, locked in a moment that seemed to stretch beyond time itself. Then, 12 did something that no unmarked warrior had ever done before. He stepped back. He stepped back, and his arms dropped to his sides, and the killing tension drained out of his body. He stood there, swaying slightly, looking at Mira with eyes that had changed somehow, eyes that held something other than the cold efficiency of a trained killer. "I don't know how to do what you did," he said. "I don't know how to choose differently. I don't know how to be anything other than what I am." Mira slowly climbed to her feet, wincing at the pain from her broken ribs, feeling the blood still seeping from her wounds. But she was smiling. "Neither did I," she said. "I had to learn. And learning is hard, and it hurts, and sometimes you fail. But it's possible. I'm proof that it's possible. The masters will never accept this. They'll send others after me. They'll hunt me until I'm dead. Maybe. Or maybe they'll realize that the unmarked program is fundamentally flawed. That warriors who can think and feel are more valuable than weapons who can only kill. Or maybe they won't, and you'll have to fight them the way I've been fighting them. But at least you'll be fighting for something real. Something that matters." The Cathari High Commander had risen from his seat, his mandibles clicking furiously. This was not how challenge combat was supposed to end. There was supposed to be a victor and a defeated. There was supposed to be a clear outcome. "The fight has not concluded," he announced. "One of you must fall." 12 turned to face him. "Then, I fall." And he dropped to his knees. The arena erupted into chaos. The Cathari delegation was shouting and clicking and gesturing frantically. The human delegation was cheering and crying and embracing each other. The observers from other species were simply staring in shock at what they had just witnessed. Mira stood over 12, looking down at the warrior who had been her rival and was now something else entirely. She reached down and offered him her hand. "Come with me," she said. "Come back to human space. I can't promise it will be easy. I can't promise everyone will accept you. But I can promise that you'll have a chance to be something more than a weapon." He looked at her hand for a long moment. Then, he took it. She pulled him to his feet, and, together, the two former unmarked warriors walked out of the arena. The crowd parted around them, still too stunned to do anything except watch.
The cameras followed them, broadcasting their exit to billions of viewers across the galaxy.
Behind them, the Cathari High Commander was already ordering his delegation to return to their ships. The ancient protocols were clear.
The challenge combat had ended. One fighter had fallen. The other had won. Humanity had won.
The news spread across the 12 colonies like a wave of fire. People poured into the streets, celebrating, crying, embracing strangers and calling out the name that was on everyone's lips.
Not Mira Chen, the quiet student. Not 17, the unmarked weapon. A new name. A battle name that would be remembered for generations.
They called her the human heart. Because she had won not by being the strongest or the fastest or the most deadly.
She had won by being the most human.
By showing mercy when mercy seemed impossible. By reaching out to an enemy and finding something worth saving. By proving that humanity's greatest strength was not its weapons or its technology, but its capacity for connection, for growth, for change. In the weeks that followed, there were endless debriefings and interviews and ceremonies. Mira stood before government councils and military tribunals and cheering crowds, telling her story over and over, explaining who she was and where she came from and how she had chosen to become something other than what she was made to be. There were those who never trusted her. Who saw only the Cathari training, the alien techniques, the decades of conditioning. Who believed she was still a weapon waiting to be triggered, still a threat to be contained. She understood their fear, even as she worked to prove them wrong. But there were also those who saw something different. Who looked at her and saw not a monster or a weapon, but a person. A young woman who had been stolen from her family and raised by monsters, who had found her way back to humanity against impossible odds. Commander Voss was waiting for her when she finally returned to the academy. He stood on the landing platform as her transport descended, his weathered face creased with the closest thing to a smile she had ever seen from him.
"Welcome home," he said.
She stepped off the ramp and into his embrace. Behind her, 12 followed hesitantly, uncertain and afraid, stepping into a world he did not understand and did not know how to navigate.
"It's going to be hard for him," Mira said. "Everything I went through, he'll have to go through too. Learning how to be a person. Learning how to feel. Learning how to belong. He'll have help," Voss said. "The same way you had help. That's what humanity does. We help each other become better than we were."
She looked back at 12, at the lost and confused expression on his alien face, and she saw herself from 3 years ago. The frightened weapon who had walked into this academy with no name and no hope and no understanding of what it meant to be human. She had come so far since then. And so much had changed. "Come on," she said to 12, reaching out to take his hand.
"Let me show you how it's done."
She led him into the academy, into the world she had built for herself, into the future she had chosen. Around her, cadets stopped to stare, instructors whispered to each other, the legend of the human heart spreading with every step she took.
But Mira didn't notice any of it.
She was too busy looking forward, thinking about all the possibilities that lay ahead, all the ways she could help others find what she had found. Because that was what she was now.
Not a weapon. Not a ghost. Not a quiet student no one noticed.
She was a bridge between worlds.
A proof of possibility.
A living example of what humanity could become when it chose hope over fear, connection over isolation, love over hatred.
She was the human heart.
And her story was just beginning. In the years that followed, Mira Chen became many things. She became a teacher at the academy, training new generations of warriors in techniques that combined human and Cathari fighting arts. She became an advisor to the government, helping to negotiate the peace treaty that ended the war and established lasting relations between the two species. She became a symbol, an inspiration, a name that parents gave their children and students wrote about in their essays. But, more than anything else, she became a friend. To 12, who slowly learned to be human and eventually chose a name of his own. To Commander Voss, who became the father she had never had. To the countless others who crossed her path and found in her an example of what they could become. The bracelet never left her wrist. Every time she looked at it, every time she felt its warmth against her skin, she remembered the moment when someone had chosen to see her as a person instead of a weapon. And, every day, she tried to do the same for someone else. Because that was what being human meant. Not being born into a family or raised in a culture or sharing a common biology. Being human meant choosing to connect, choosing to care, choosing to see the person hidden inside even the most damaged shell. The quiet student no one noticed was gone forever. In her place stood the human heart, and her battle name was all anyone could talk about. But, if you asked her which name she preferred, she would smile and touch the bracelet on her wrist and say that she liked all of them. Because every name was part of the story. Every name was a step on the journey. And the journey was what mattered. The journey from weapon to warrior to woman to friend. The journey from invisible to unforgettable. The journey home.